Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. I'm Kisma and I'm so happy you're here today. This is one of our episodes where we have a guest who, her message is amazing. She's a phenomenal human being and has really changed the lives of many, many women. Sarah Nannan, who is a life coach for widows and best-selling author of Grief Unveiled, a widow's guide to navigating your journey in life after loss. And we'll dive in with her at a deeper level in just a few minutes. But before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to Nick because he's been working hard this week.
Hello, welcome.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. What's new?
What's new? All sorts of things are new. All sorts of really cool projects. Like I've been in a mode of things have been happening. And it's always really exciting for me. You know, we were talking about this yesterday and how, you know, it's not for everybody. Like everybody's not built the exact same way. But for me personally, where I was getting kind of fatigued a little, I was noticing a little bit of energetic fatigue because I wasn't making any order before I was doing things. And I know that some people can just get after it and just do, but I'm not one of those people. And then I caught myself like with it pretty quickly and I started to make some order and I was like, oh man, like I can breathe.
That's divine order, man.
It's exciting to see it kind of unfold too. And it's fun to watch the things move forward. So with Energy Mastery, we've got all kinds of I've got a training this weekend and then I've got all kinds of really cool things that are continuing to come out. And then, I'm so excited about some of the things that we're doing with the Ultimate Life tool and putting together some materials for that so that people can really see what it's about and start to understand like this amazing technology.
I think we'll be doing a whole podcast on that.
Or a few. So that's a lot, so a lot's been going on. I'm really excited and I'm so excited to be here with our guest today.
I know. So why don't we dive in and bring Ms. Sarah Nannan on. Sarah, hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Nick. Hi, Kisma. I'm so excited to be with you today.
And you're coming from where? Illinois?
I'm in central Illinois and it's snowing in April.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Recording this on I think it's April 15th, 16th or something. And it's funny because I went for a drive this morning and it was beautiful, sunny in San Diego. And I almost took a picture and sent it to my sisters in Columbus and my brother in Minnesota. And I just thought that would be a cruel joke. So I didn't. But hopefully spring is around the corner for you. So, well, thanks for being here. I mean, your story is one that captured my heart when I met you at an event with a mutual friend of ours in New York City. And, you know, it's one around grief. It's one around specifically grief for women. And it's also about shedding the grief. To me, it was like shedding the grief and stepping back into living life fully. So I want to open it up and have you share a bit of, you know, what it is that in your words you do for women. Let's start there and then we'll get into some of your story.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about this, especially today, because I'm just coming out of a 3-day live event with women who've just completed my program. And it's been so exciting to watch their journeys unfold. But what I'm doing really is reframing the entire grief process instead of something that happens to you that leaves you suffering eternally, and shifting it to something that you can move through. And as we do that, we learn how to grieve with intention instead of in this victim suffering mentality that we're sort of taught in our culture, and also to really cultivate some practices that allow us to be more present for that journey through grief, so we can also move toward intentional living again in this life after loss that we have to figure out all over again.
Something caught my eye right in the beginning of your book, and it says, we've been told mourning comes at us in 5 stages. It paints a picture of grief that is tidy, organized, and run by a rigid structure of rules it will follow. And I thought that was so interesting of like how we would take something as unique as that experience to every individual and want to put it into a 5-step, system, a 5-step process that'll, you go through these stages and then you're all better or it'll all be fine. It's so funny that that has been done. And I understand the need of the model, but I also understand how incredibly broken that can make people feel when they don't fit into that, or when they wonder, where the heck am I in this process? And when they're bouncing around. Can you share a little bit more of your insight around that? And is there a process to grieving, or is it very different?
So when I started writing this book, my book coach and publisher really wanted me to make my own steps that people had to move through systematically. And I said, it just doesn't work that way, because some people start at step 3 and then go to step 1 and step 7. And some people have already done some of these steps or have cultivated some of these tools in their life before they became a widow. And so they skip over those and never get there. And so I think what happens in our culture, unfortunately, is we really live within this medicalized model of grief, and we've made it pathology instead of this hardwired response of our system, our psyche, our cellular and soul level immune system to move us toward healing. And instead of moving through this grief experience, we move away from it and we almost reject it. And that's really what's keeping us stuck so often, is our refusal to participate in this really intense emotional experience.
Why is it that you think that happens, especially in our culture? Is it a demand for quick fix and positivity and get back to work syndrome, or is there not enough support for people that are going through grief?
I think all of those things, Kisma, are a part of it. Certainly this idea of I shouldn't have to feel this, or it's not safe to feel that. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. We immediately, when we find out this tragic, terrible news, we immediately brace for the worst. And I was anticipating my demise. I was waiting for that day when my mental functions were incapacitated, when I was lying in bed, heavily medicated with no one to care for my children. And part of my decision-making process was built around that expectation that it would and should and must happen to me. And so we've really equated grief with depression, or something even deeper into the mental illness realm. And I remember Googling, is this grief or is this depression? And I didn't get a clear answer, but I was really afraid to know. And I just kept anticipating that belief structure to become realized in my life. And so part of it is really just this commitment and this dedication to outrunning the grief so that we don't become ill. We just have this expectation, I think, in our culture. When you think about the stigma, and I have my women who I coach do this, I'm like, what is your widow archetype? What is your belief structure around what it means to be a widow? And they all say the same things. Yeah. And one of those is that they're a little crazy and they never are quite the same again. And so that's part of it. But it's also, I think it has to do with the way that our grief resources are organized. And when people are grieving, they either go to organized religion or they go to medical institutions. Yeah. And both of those have pretty rigid structures around what's possible in healing. And I think, unfortunately, both of those structures also really ultimately don't actually believe in our capacity for healing. And that's really the thing that strikes me the most, is that even my therapist kind of saw me as this unsavable, pathetic figure. So what do you do with that when the person you're going to for guidance doesn't understand the journey?
I mean, that's sad to me, because we know our body wants to heal, our mind wants to heal, our emotions want to heal. And I can imagine that one is never the same, yet not being the same isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly.
Would you be open to sharing a bit of your story of what happened with you, your husband who passed, and you had children at the time? I know this must have been, when I read your writings, it was like your worst nightmare.
It certainly was. I was living in Japan, actually, at the time. We were on a tiny Marine Corps air station in Iwakuni, Japan. We had 4 kids. Our oldest was 5, and our youngest was actually 6 weeks old. And she was born while her dad was away on training. And it was a Sunday morning in our house. I was making lunch when a knock came at the door, and it came following that. There was this almost like a movie scene that you see in the movies, where these Marines dressed in their finest uniforms were standing outside my door, and the look on their face told me everything I needed to know. And that just set into action this string of emotions, of course, but also this incredible transformation. And a week later, I was relocated stateside because he was in the States actually when it happened.
I see.
So I packed up 4 babies and 12 suitcases, and across the ocean we went to go tend to business.
What allowed you to function? I mean, being overseas, I'm figuring there wasn't family around you right then. I'm sure you had some friends, but it's not the usual support system that we think about when something tragic happens. How did you get from A to Z to get across the ocean, like you said, and back home?
I think honestly, in those first days, it was sort of this disassociation from my emotions and my body a little bit. I had an incredible community around me, and my parents actually flew across the ocean to help me get everyone home and to take care of some of it. But it was just this state of shock. And so I think pure adrenaline in that fight or flight mode truly kicked in and carried me to that place where I got home. And that was one of the interesting things about my first year, was that never really actually let down, because I was so committed to not being mentally ill, to not being seen as the pathetic, tragic widow. And so in my effort to exude grace and strength, I sort of blocked my own grief and went on this continuation of survival mode until my body started getting sick, and I started realizing how miserable I was in not just my body, but also in my heart. And that was when I started looking for something different.
You mentioned that in one of the chapters as well, just trying to outrun it or outthink it. And what I thought was so interesting about that is how exhausting that can be. And you're saying, it's like what you mentioned was that it's almost like you're trying to avoid being sick or that label that goes on it. And it's actually creating that. Yeah, it's creating that exact thing, because it's exhausting you and your body's going to take the hit from that sooner or later.
Right. And we know that when you stay in that activated fight response in your physiology, it creates this activated trauma state that you just sort of get stuck in. And of course, none of your body works there forever. And so the wheels kind of started to fall off, and I was having heart palpitations and just extreme chronic fatigue beyond what you would expect from being a busy single mom of 4 kids. And I kind of started seeking out support there. And it was interesting that I went to the usual suspects first, my general doctor and then a cardiologist, and everyone said the same thing. You must just have anxiety because you have a dead husband and 4 kids.
Oh, man.
And I thought,
that must have
I don't think that's true.
Yeah. That must have been heart sinking. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So that was really the pivotal moment for me, I guess, when I started looking for something else, because I didn't feel seen in any of the support or any of the medical support for that matter. And that was when I shifted to a more holistic approach. And so
is that something with the women that you work with is a constant where they're like, yeah, they didn't hear, I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen. That's feedback that you've been getting.
And unfortunately, a lot of that's in our grief, counseling and our grief therapy. So a lot of them will say, I went once or twice, and they all sort of said the same thing. It just didn't really seem like they saw me. It was more like they were trying to fix me. And so one of the biggest messages that I'm bringing to the world is truly that we don't need to be saved in our grief. We need to be seen. And there's something so powerful in being seen within this sisterhood of women who understand it, who don't need it explained, and who aren't trying to save you.
Now, you talk about turning inward. And it sounds to me like, was that the moment, like when you just felt so unseen by others, that was the moment that you just decided, well, I'm going to just turn in and start to look at myself? Was that what inspired that, or did that come later?
I think that came with the divine timing of the fact that I was in my yoga teacher training 200-hour program. And what I found there was myself waiting to be seen by me first. Right? No one can see you unless you allow them to see you. And I hadn't yet seen myself. And so I learned to use that witnessing mind concept and observe myself almost from the outside looking in and see all of these things that were happening in me that I didn't realize were happening. And so much of my fear and shame and guilt and judgment in this grief journey, especially in the first year or so, it was all really coming from myself first.
Mm-hmm. And in that process of turning inward, I mean, one of the things I've seen, certainly in the spiritual communities and in people who are, finding a spiritual path, is that then they do turn inward, and that's awesome. And then they start to kind of turn on themselves, or they get really wrapped up in their own heads,
or they
without any sense of objectivity. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, the difference between turning inward and winding yourself into your own head and your own thoughts.
Sure. I think that's what I was doing, was unwinding myself from being in my own head. So often we have all of these voices in our head, not that we're schizophrenic, of course, but we've got, the voices of fear, and we have the voices of our parents probably, and, other authority figures that have been influential in our lives, sort of contributing to the thought process. And we hear all of them as truth. Right. And I think one of the biggest things that helped me was learning to find stillness and softening from this really intense masculine energy, forcing, striving, trying to be right, trying to be okay. And instead softening and allowing all of the feelings to be there, instead of making them mean something about sickness or incapacity for healing. Instead, I just learned how to let the sadness come when it was there and acknowledge it almost like you would in a child. And yeah, you're sad. Of course you're sad. And letting that come through. And I was watching as I learned to express and interface with these emotions and actually really kind of almost take them to inquiry and understand, why am I sad? Because it's easy to say I'm sad because my husband died. But below that, there's all of these other sadnesses. I'm sad that my kids won't have a father. I'm sad that I don't have this partner and friend and lover. But also I realized at some point it was more about, I'm sad because I don't know who I'm allowed to be now without him.
That is a beautiful perspective. And I love that about how your journey and yoga teacher training created this awareness and objectivity and witnessing. I mean, that Sakshi piece that's why I love yoga so much. I love the movement, but I really love the philosophy behind it and what we can really nurture through that. The yoga teacher training, were you doing this during the first year after your husband's death, or was it after the first year?
I started it just before the first year anniversary, and it was just something that intuitively I was drawn toward, I was curious about. And I was looking for what do I do now? Right. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I'd like some space for me to find and use my gifts and talents in the world. So I just sort of followed this intuitive hit and signed up to create some space for myself in the story where I didn't feel like there was a lot of it. And so it unfolded over that second year of my grief journey. And it was the best decision I ever made.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that. Before we start to talk about your program and how I'm sure it was just being created as you went through this experience, can you share a little bit about, two questions for me, but the difference for a woman and your thoughts around it when a woman loses her husband young and a woman loses her husband 50 years into the marriage. I know we can look at one as being so dramatic and drastic and tragic as a young wife, yet when we look at a woman who's lived with one person for decades, it can as well. And I'm just curious on your perspective, how you would approach each of these differently, or would you?
That's such a great question. And initially I thought they would be really differently, but what I've learned is truly, Kisma, the only difference between them is the way that our culture treats them. Because in my program, I have 30-year-old women, and I have mid-50s and mid-60s, and I have a 71-year-old woman, and they are all experiencing these universal experiences together, different from their stories. Some have daughters, and some have daughters' daughters, and some never had children, and yet they're all really moving through these same pillars along their journey. And a lot of it is just simply this coming home to themselves, because the grief that was really initiated by the death of their beloved has allowed them to interface with their own vulnerability in a way that they probably were never willing or interested in before. Because of the way that we're trained to be good and to be likable and to be worthy and to be pretty. And so we talk a lot about how we give up these innate pieces of ourselves along the journey of becoming a mother, becoming a wife, becoming a grandmother, whatever the roles are that you take on. And so some of it is going back through the story and picking up the pieces of yourself that you left behind and really integrating them back into the places where you feel this emptiness and finding out, who am I, almost for the first time in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I love that. That's so precious. I know people struggle with grief. I know they struggle when someone loses someone they love. I know that humans struggle with tragedy and they don't always know what to say or how to be. And it can be misconstrued and it can create heartache. It can create new relationships. From your perspective, from your words, share a bit about how people can relate to someone in grief. And I don't like to use the word right, like say the right thing, but what is a connective nature? Like, how can they support a woman going through something like this?
You're right. People say a lot of things, and a lot of them are received with some pain. It's surprising. I couldn't believe how much of that early journey was spent navigating this complicated social world of people trying to love me and kind of getting it wrong in a lot of cases. And so I think one of the most important things is to understand what empathy is, because everyone offers condolences and everyone offers these really safe quips and platitudes that we've been taught are like, these are the things that you're allowed to say to someone who's grieving. Don't say anything else. And a lot of those fall so shallow. I mean, what does it mean when you say, I'm so sorry for your loss? People wanted to say, how are you? And I didn't know how to even answer them because I wasn't actually sure how I was. And I didn't know if they really wanted to know the answer. But I think empathy, if they don't quite know what the difference is between sympathy, it's this curiosity to understand what it's like for us instead of presuming that we know, because there's so much projection of our own fears when we come towards someone else's deep, intimate, raw emotional landscapes. And so instead of saying you must be, or I'm sure you feel, and then fill in the blank, it's so much more loving to say, what's it like to be you right now? How can I show up with you right now? Instead of saying, call me if you need anything, you call them and see how they're doing.
Right. And not just the week after or the month after. It's really an ongoing, I love that word, curiosity from a heart-centered place. And you're so right. It's like from the cards at Hallmark and just there's so much in society that is just superficial and at the surface layer. And I think that many people have never really learned or been taught or shown or experienced it from others during their own grief. So it becomes like this unknown way to navigate. I love the way you share that. It's, so helpful.
A lot of people ask me, what do you say? Because it's easy to say what not to say. And the thing I always come back to is, I love you and I'm here for you. And then actually show up and keep showing up, just like you said, because it's not just until the funeral or the month afterward that we're on this deep journey. It's years. And so showing up to see that person. And I appreciated the sisters in my tribe who were willing to laugh when I needed to laugh and cry when I needed to cry, and sometimes do both at the same time and not make it mean anything about anything.
Yeah. I mean, as the outsider looking in, it's scary, because you don't know if what you're going to say, like what that's going to bring up for that person. And you might not know how to handle that. So I can certainly see people, having a hard time, stepping into that space with somebody else, no matter how much they care about them. It's not about that. It's more about like, geez, their own fears that come up around, golly, I don't know how I would handle that. And they might say something that I just have no idea how to respond to. And that's a scary space. So it's like, they have to be willing to step into that as well and really just be present with it. And I think that's, the beauty about the whole experience is just that it opens up that opportunity for real human connection.
And way past, I grew up in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and there's just so much ceremony around when someone leaves the planet. And it's as if, let's just do all these things from showings and funerals and duchas and lunches and, the 40 days after. And once all that's over, it's all good. It's kind of like we want the ceremony to represent, and it just doesn't. It's beautiful and it's helpful, but it doesn't represent, it doesn't take the place of true human connection.
It sure doesn't. And I'll tell you from the inside, it's almost like it's for everyone else's consumption for their grief moment, because when you're at the helm of that funeral for your husband, you're really still in that survival mode and that shock place. And so I'm so glad they took a video of it, because I wasn't as present as I would have liked to be. And it wasn't really what I needed at that time. It was sort of this thing we had to do, and everyone else needed it. So we did it. And, my work and my grieving and my rituals came long after that.
Yeah, probably a little soon, for you at that point. And have you thought about your own funeral? Do you want it to be a party? Like what do you want that to be for yourself?
I have thought about it, because when you bury somebody you love, it makes you face your own mortality, of course. And I know that the funeral itself, I want it to be a private ceremony, a really sacred ceremony honoring my journey and giving those people who are left behind space to have their experience with it. I don't want to be buried in a cemetery. I'd really like to be returned to the earth in a more natural way, but I would like there to be a party and a celebration of life, but not right away, because we tried that with my husband. And a lot of people, when they celebrate life, they like to include alcohol. And I was hiding in the bathroom for a lot of the evening, trying to dodge well-meaning drunk people who were celebrating in their own way. But it was hard for me to engage in their forms of celebration.
I can understand.
Yeah. It really is just far too soon. I think,
Totally got it.
Thanks for answering that.
Yeah. So at what point, if there was a point, or if it just was building, did you decide, okay, you went through yoga certification, you're a life coach, it's time to focus in on women who are grieving? How did that come to be?
Well, I didn't decide. In fact, I fought it kicking and screaming for quite a while as these things happened. But it really, truly was this soul calling that no matter how much I tried, I couldn't outrun it. So I was actually, every time there was a fatal crash in the military after my husband, I was immediately contacted by people who were involved saying, would you talk to her? Could she talk to you? And I didn't want to be that person. I remember saying to my friend, I don't want to be the crash whisperer or the lady who talks about grief all the time. I don't want to, I'm already a widow. That's bad enough. When you're at a cocktail party and people ask what you do, you definitely don't want to be the widow who talks about death all the time. So I fought it, and I just kept doing my little life coaching business and teaching yoga classes. And finally, when I was out in San Diego, actually, with a girlfriend of mine and our daughters for a week-long getaway, I got a call from a friend of ours from our time in Japan, and she told me that there had been another crash, and that the woman, the new widow, lived in San Diego, and she knew I was there and had requested I come see her before I left. And
getting the chills.
In that moment, I honestly, Kisma, just fell to my knees on the kitchen floor, and I just started crying, and I softened, and I said, okay, I don't know what this will look like. I have no idea how this will feel. She just found out yesterday that her husband died. I don't know if I can be of use to her, but I'll go. So later that day, I walked into her home that was filled with mourning people who loved her, and walked out to the garden, and we enjoyed this couple of hour-long, really intimate, beautiful, vulnerable conversation where I got to just see her, and I got to show her just a little glimpse of hope.
Yeah.
Not, silver linings, not here's how you fix it, but just, I want you to know that this journey will take you to a new place, and there is a sweetness on the other side that I know you can't even fathom right now. I just want you to know it's there, and that every day when you take these tiny steps, you'll be moving in the direction of it. And it was interesting how similar it felt to my former work as a birth doula, standing beside women in labor who were in this deep, raw emotional landscape. And that same thing, letting her be at the center of her own storm and really calling upon her own power and saying, it's not that you do this, you are doing this, and you have everything you need, and I'm here, and so are all of these other people surrounding you for this journey that you're taking.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I want to turn to a section, and I just love this quotable. This is 100% getting made into a meme. Self-care isn't about a bath and a couple of candles. It's about learning to notice your pain and holding it tenderly so that you may move through. It's so spot on with the ideas that we have about self-care, being, I'll let myself have an extra piece of cake, for comfort food, or I'm going to have a little bath and light a candle. And then that's my self-care for the week.
Or a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Or a bottle of wine, or the month. Yeah. And it's just so horribly inadequate and really, really so minimally helpful. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about true self-care and how you see that.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Nick. It's one of my favorite things to talk about and to really teach people, particularly women, although I know men are in deep need of this as well.
Yeah, I'm coming back to that. I have questions about guys too.
Good. I can't wait. So we really live in this world where self-care is thought of as a luxury, and luxury in our world, like you mentioned, is baths or cake or wine or getting your nails done. We don't really value it on the medicinal level that we require it. And so this notion of self-care is really noticing what you notice about what you need. And self-care includes things like setting boundaries and saying no and taking space for sleep. And for me, it looked like hiring a babysitter so that I could just be alone long enough to even know what I was thinking or feeling at all. And yeah, we really live in this place where we're so disconnected from the truth of our needs, and we're taught that and we're modeled that. Unfortunately, it leaves us almost as these shells of humans, like we're drones going through this factory model of life. We're sleepwalking, and we're going to work, and we're paying the bills, and we're feeding the kids, and we're going to the practice, and we're driving to dance, and what? Yeah. We're not having this awake, alive human experience where our needs count and our needs matter. And so for me, self-care used to be this luxury item, but now I know that I 100% need body work. It's the same for me as brushing my teeth or going for my annual exam or any of the other things that you couldn't fathom your life without. If you treated your self-care like you treated your cup of coffee in the morning, imagine how much better you would feel.
I couldn't agree more. The healing technique that we utilize is definitely one of the things I always share with people that go through the program. I'm like, this is as important as brushing your teeth. And
probably more, actually.
Yeah, probably more. I mean, but at least they get it with that piece, Okay. If I think about this as being brushing my teeth, then that kind of gets me in the ballpark. But really, like how you manage your human, it's so critical, and it is unique how people's needs are different. That's we have this assessment tool that we utilize that gives people, it tells you. When you talked about the voices in your head, I cracked up because I said, as a matter of fact, there's 12 of them. But regardless, it's what fuels you and how you need to get that fuel in order for you and your unique human, one of the only one like you on the whole planet, really needs to relate to that in the most effective way. And that's an art. And it's and it should be and I'll use the should word. I'll should all over it. Is that it should be treated as an art and something that is really like a craft that you develop and a skill that you develop in order to be really effective at managing yourself, not just so that you can recover and restore from something as tragic as grief, but also so that you can take those next steps, which I know you talk about in your book too, of that, that's part of the journey, but that ain't the end of it for sure. There's so much more beyond that. And I just think that's the coolest thing.
Absolutely. And I think we, just as much as we talked about quick fix earlier with therapy and resources, it's the same thing where we're expecting this quick fix. I'm so exhausted, so let me have another cup of coffee so I can't feel my exhaustion. Yeah. I'm so stressed, so let me just watch 2 more hours of Netflix so I don't have to feel my stress. And we disassociate and we numb and disconnect from what we're feeling. And that's what we're taught, that is self-care. How can I figure out how not to have this human experience that I'm having instead of creating space to actually have it and to tend to it. And the truth is, it's physical as much as it is subtle body. And so there's so much self-care that we require, managing the energy, managing the drama, and the ways that that manifests physically just as much as it does mentally, emotionally, on the soul level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were at an event this past weekend, a concert, and we were talking with a registered nurse. She works in the ER at a county hospital. And one of the really interesting things that she brought up, we talked about it in some depth, is how there has become this feeling that we shouldn't have to experience pain. Yes. And so in her profession, that looks like people want drugs. You know, when they feel pain, they're like, give me something for the pain. Yeah. And she, it's the exact same thing as she said is, you know, an opiate, it doesn't make the pain go away. Actually, it doesn't do anything for the pain. All it does is distract you from it so that it doesn't matter to you as much.
Feel it.
Yeah. And so, it's the same way emotionally, it seems like. And I know, you know, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are some of the ways that people distract themselves? Like, how do they jar themselves out of that pattern and really allow the pain?
Sure. Well, you know, that's what we're taught. That's what we're told. And people are expecting you to go back to normal, your old normal. And so we're hustling. I call it the grief hustle. We're doing all the things that we can try to be okay. And this is that really forcing masculine energy of, if I just try hard enough and long enough, this will go away. And so it looks like overscheduling yourself. It looks like ignoring your exhaustion. It looks like numbing with substances and TV shows and scrolling through the Facebook feed for hours because you're lonely. And then that makes you feel not lonely anymore, even though you're still totally alone.
Right.
And what we're really doing is, I don't use the word meditation and mindfulness because people seem to be averse to that, and it sounds really scary and hard and complicated for them. I continually to this concept of noticing what you notice and not making it mean anything. So notice what you notice about how you feel in your body. Notice what you notice about how you feel in your heart and in your thoughts. Notice what you notice about how you feel about the schedule of your calendar today. Because what we find is that we're numbing with exhaustion just as much as we are numbing with substances and distractions. If we're tired enough, we can't actually feel any of it either because our most primary basic survival needs aren't being met. So what I'm really creating is this space where I'm teaching women without them knowing it at first, how to meditate, how to allow their physiological responses to ground and to come down from that fight and flight response so that they can learn how to be present and witness their experience. And I know every widow out there who's hearing this is like, that's not what I need. I have a dead husband and I need him back. That's the only thing that will fix it. I know that because that was me. But as we learn how to create stillness and we learn how to get grounded and let the physiology of grief ground itself and come present, we learn how to witness our thoughts and our emotions in a new way. And then we learn how to take them to inquiry, is what I call it, and understand what's this coming from, what's it asking for, and what's the path to freedom in the form of expressing, releasing, or healing this.
Two things. Nick, I want to just go back to something you said, and maybe we reframe it. You said the tragedy of grief. Is grief tragic, or is it the loss? Or because grief, just share a little bit about that, Sarah. Like, is it actually tragic, or is it a beautiful process?
Well, I think we've turned it into a tragedy because we're really disconnected from the truth that every single person who's ever born will die. And I'm always kind of surprised how even when great grandpa Albert, who's 97, who's had cancer for 7 years, dies, we're all like a little surprised.
I know, right?
And I mean, I'm committed to real talk and real truth about this stuff. And I know sometimes people can say like, oh, that was really intense the way you said that. But sometimes it paints this picture that we haven't quite actually consciously considered, that why are we all so surprised that we all at some point or another die? And I know, organized religion plays into that, and our human willingness to ignore the truth of that reality because it makes us feel a little safer in our daily life. But what I'm learning, from my own journey and continually learning and being shown from these amazing women that I'm so honored to get to support, is that there are these gifts hidden in the rubble of your grief. And it really does feel like your life is over. It really does feel like there's no hope. The darkness is so all-consuming for a time. But as you move through this consciously with this intention to move toward the light, to practice gratitude, even for the tiniest moments in your day, and to look for something more than your own suffering in your life, you slowly and steadily move through it and find these gifts. And so it's different for every woman. But, this weekend I celebrated and helped hold space for their integration of these gifts that they found. And this really vibrant, outspoken, powerful woman was just in tears about the peace that she felt because she had learned how to soften and love so powerfully and feel this connected love, this profound love with her late husband, who had been returned to the universe. And she was like, I can feel his love so powerfully now everywhere I go in my life. And it's just a beautiful thing to know that while he's not here on this physical plane with me, I absolutely feel his presence in the wind, in the sunset, in the pink blanket wrapped around me. And it's not that she's, all about him in her life after loss, but that she has been able to see this universal love that really is the source that we all are connected.
So good. Yeah, it's that identification with that divine love. That's amazing.
So in their grief journey, because they're finding their voice, they're finding their needs and learning how to express them. They're learning how to say no, thank you, and express their truths, whatever they are. And I think honestly that coming home to yourself journey that was initiated by the grief, that's the beauty of it. So it's a tragic loss, and it's this heartbreak of having the person who made your world make sense to you be ripped out of the middle of your story. And so many of us just circle around that emptiness and never move forward. But what we're learning to do is pick up the pen and continue to author the rest of our story.
When you speak about tragedy, I think that, and this may just be unique to me, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's part of the human experience, but it's exactly what we've done. It's what we humans have done to that word and what we've done to that, to put all over it to make it, try to put it back into a 5-step process to get out.
Sure.
And you're going to take these steps. And
but really it turns you into a victim.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this is just where I'm at, and I have to, and it's not, it's like it's happening to you instead of really giving you the opportunity to see something new within yourself. But I get it, like that's the flip side of the coin for me is like, it is intense. And I believe it can be terrifying for any human being to look into themselves because you don't really know what you're going to see there. And the same, this is something that we joke about, Kisma and I, in our relationship with, like who's more attached to the other and that. and the truth be told is you never know until you know.
Yeah, this is true.
And when the chips are really down and you're in that situation, that's the only way you'll ever really know. And so the work continues to just try and be in your experience and not attached to it and let yourself be a human being, exactly. let it be okay to be human.
that's so much that we talk so much about reclaiming your humanness in all of this instead of striving to be a good widow or a good wife or a good woman. Let's just learn how to be humans again and have a human experience and allow for all of that to come through because it's all there in you, whether you're ignoring it or not. And so what happens when you identify it and name it and either claim it or release it is you become more whole in your humanness.
Totally. I feel like when you describe this work that you're doing, it's taking a woman from a linear perspective to this in-depth, like experiencing life on so many different realms and dimensions and arriving to this place where they know so much more about at least themselves. And that's a pretty amazing place to arrive to.
It truly is. And I cried a lot this weekend as I was holding space because there was so much gratitude and awe in me watching these women who I met a couple of months ago who were so empty and were so consumed with sadness. And, they were like, I really don't have hope and I'm not sure what else to try. So I'm willing to try anything, but I just don't actually believe in the possibility for happiness or even a little bit of joy. Yeah. I mean, I laugh sometimes, but that grief is just right there behind it. And so to see them so liberated from that and so radiant, I mean, they were just luminous standing there together in their power and loving each other and loving themselves and their lives and saying things like, I'm so excited to see what happens next. Coming from that same mouth who just couldn't even fathom the future a few months ago.
It's definitely going up the scale of consciousness. I mean, there's a willingness, right, to live again and to see again and to share again. That's powerful. I want to get back to the men, the conversation around men. What do men need to know? Just share a bit. We've got Nick here, so he can ask questions too.
I can verify.
Well, the truth be told, I'm not a man, so I can never pretend to fully know what it's like to be them. But I know that when I was reading one of Brene Brown's books, something she wrote really struck me. And it was that men need this powerful vulnerability just as much as women do. And not only are men unwilling to claim that for themselves, but women so often are unwilling to allow that in them and to celebrate and honor that in them. And from my perspective, being, a military officer at one point and then a military spouse, I've spent a fair amount of time around really powerful men kind of people. And it was really interesting to experience their grief for my late husband and the way that it had to be packaged in their world for them to be safe. And it looked a lot like this. Tomorrow we get back in the jets. So take today to do what you need to do. And my heart really just broke for that, because I know that they'll only be afforded those anniversary markers, his anniversary of his death, his birthday, to grieve again. And it's interesting that when I come to town, they'll hold me and they'll cry as we tell stories and remember. And it kind of breaks my heart. Actually, it truly breaks my heart that they're just not afforded that in the culture that we've created, where masculinity is equated to this sterilized emotional experience. And we expect our warriors to be completely void of deep human emotions. And so really this is just an invitation for men to come forward with the truth of their hearts as much as women. I haven't had the opportunity yet to support a widower, and I would be so incredibly honored to hear their stories, because I know that their journey through grief is going to be different than the widows. And as much universality as I've seen among the women that I've supported, I'm positive that their experience will be different.
Right. And I love the way you share that. And you were in the Navy yourself. Is that correct?
I was.
Yeah. So there must be, or possibly a completely different dynamic because of simply that role, the warrior having to get back to it, owning that responsibility and embodying the responsibility of protecting our country. Yet, if there were those moments of being able to really express and to feel and to evolve through that, I can only imagine the power as well that could evolve from that.
Absolutely. And it's easy to paint a picture that it's just the guys in the military who aren't afforded the opportunity to grieve. But the truth is, it's such a prevalent reality in our culture. And in Brene Brown's book, she said, I was talking to this man who came up to me after a talk on shame. And he said, what about the men? And she said, well, I don't know. I haven't worked with any men. And he said, I can tell you right now, my wife and my daughter are out in the lobby, and they would rather see me die than to fall off that white horse that I'm riding on. I can never reveal the depth of shame and fear that I hold in my soul to them. And it just really evoked in me this deep compassion. So I feel that I am a student of men and what it means to be a man in our culture. And I have such deep appreciation for these amazing creatures that are men who enrich our lives so fully. But I know that there is such a deeper experience and wisdom in them that we're not honoring or allowing them to reveal in our culture.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think it's awesome that, I do see a lot more coaches who work specifically with men. And it's just like anything else, there's all shades of it. You see the ones that are like, the warrior, like hyper masculine alpha kind of thing. And that's okay. And then you see the others who are just like, oh, we're just really going to get in our feelings, and they get really into that feminine side. And that's cool too. And I think that there's actually something that is more inclusive and more encompassing for what it really is to be a man, because we're all human first.
Right.
Yet it expresses through, the male psychology and what we've done, what has been done to that, which is pretty interesting, I think, as far as what's put on us. And it's a funny dance, and I think one of the most common things that I've heard in working with men is that they don't know the right thing to do sometimes.
Right.
So there's this part of them that deeply wants to be able to express themselves and really feel and be vulnerable. And then there's another part of them that really feels like, if I do that, then I could lose respect, or I could be seen as weak, or it could really shift how the women in my life relate to me. Mm-hmm. And that also is a scary place. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have the answer to that. I haven't developed a man's program. It's something for me personally. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. This is something that I'm just kind of continuing to evolve myself, but it's a conversation that I've been having with myself a lot. Is like, well, what does that even mean?
Yeah. What's interesting, when you were saying those fears about being vulnerable and expressing, those are actually the same exact fears that the women I'm supporting in grief have about being vulnerable and being seen. And so what's interesting is we talk about masculine and feminine and women and men like they're separate, but the truth is we've all got these feminine and masculine energies in us, and they're all waiting to be expressed in balance. And so I think, I talk to my women about their warrior and their goddess, and they both have a time and they both have a season and they both have a place in the order of things. And the same is for men. They have kings within them, but they also have this divine light in them too. And they both are seeking to support different processes and experiences, and they're both ready to be expressed, and they're not exclusive of each other.
Yeah. So true.
So I think what we're trying to create is this: how do we create safe expressions of this within the cultural normalized sexual expression?
Right. Yeah. So true. I love that.
Yeah. And how do we do it with strength? Mm-hmm. Is an important part of that, of like, there are times when you need to be strong. Mm-hmm. Like no question about it. You do have to just set it aside and get on with the job at hand. Whether it's because other people need you, they're counting on you. I'm sure that you know what that's like as a mother, and every woman must know what that's like. And at the same time, to also allow that space for yourself. I think it's a really an interesting dance.
What we're finding more and more, Nick, is that this notion of vulnerability is not actually weakness, but it's this expression of our superpower.
That's a great way to put it.
And when we're willing to go to that vulnerable place, it actually moves us through the experience so much more quickly, and we feel so much empowerment and personal strength as a result of it. So we have created this monster of a thing called vulnerability that looks like weakness and looks like a disaster of a person. But the truth of it is, when we're willing to get vulnerable and be seen and see each other, our strength rises through in a way that we couldn't have anticipated because of what we believe culturally about it.
Yeah, that's great.
I think for that was really helpful to kind of clarify for me, of like, it's in the setting aside sometimes, like when you do have to just kind of step in and do your life, so that everything doesn't go off the rails, and it becomes so easy to just make that the answer rather than saying, okay, check for a moment. I'm going to get on with this. And then also at the same time, like you talked about in the self-care, is making sure that you get back to that, because that didn't go anywhere. It's just like the pain, it distracted you from it a little bit, but that didn't go anywhere. So there really does have to be that mechanism to come back and see it. So you have this kind of in and out of having a life and being, doing life and then also really being human and vulnerable in that. So thanks for bringing that clarity to it.
Yeah, this is amazing. Before, like I said, I think there's more podcasts. The three of us we could just go on for hours. But I do want to, before we have a final couple words, I want to make sure everyone grabs the book. This is not just for people who have or are going through grief. It's such a great conversation. And obviously we'll have the links in our show notes, but as well, you can go to griefunveiled.com. And For those listening that might need to reach out immediately, there's an email. Sarah, just let me know if this is the best one, but hello@griefunveiled.com. I'm just thinking that there could be a listener, there could be someone who knows someone that would really like to reach out to you and learn more about your program for women right away. So is that the best context? And could you share a little bit about your program as well?
Yes, thanks, Kisma. That is the right email address, hello@griefunveiled.com. I love hearing other women's stories and honoring the journey that they've been on. And at some point in the journey, my program becomes appropriate for you because there's a time and a place for this grief and for other, grief support modalities. But when you find yourself at the place on your journey when you're starting to look up and see the life around you and you're asking questions like, is this really all there is for me?
Yeah.
When you're doing all the right things and trying all the right things and showing up in all the right ways and nothing is budging and you can't shake the emptiness of the grief, that's when you're ready to work with me. And so it's a combination of things, right? I'm not going to tell you how to do things. I'm going to walk beside you so that you don't have to figure it out on your own, but I am going to help you turn toward your intuition and your own knowing to determine the right path for you. And you work through this system that I've created to understand how to connect with those parts of yourself. And the beautiful thing is you also get to connect with this amazing sisterhood of other women who are on the same journey. And you share your experiences in a way that is enriching and empowering for all of you collectively.
Right. I love that. That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Nick, did you have any final last questions or shares?
Well, like you said, I think we can go on for hours. I kind of want to get back to that some other time, that issue of like, well, why do we think we're going to live forever?
Well, I have my theory on that perhaps that's
we'll save that one.
Yeah,
we'll save that one.
Tell me when, I'll be back.
Yeah. Is there anything that is on your bucket list that you really want to do in life that you've yet to share with anybody?
My ultimate dream here is to create this healing center where people can come and set up shop and sort of move in so that they can create space for grief in their life. And I think it's going to be somewhere in Central America. So stand by for that.
Okay. That sounds like a dream. That's great.
Once that happens, I'll be able to explain to everyone why I needed to be a Spanish major back in college.
For sure. And also, would you share a bit about your life now, your fiance, your children? I think it's a beautiful way to come full circle and let everyone know what that's like for you now.
Sure. Well, I stayed in the town that I moved back to and swore I wouldn't be here long. But I've slowly fallen in love with this small community in Central Illinois, surrounded by my family, my in-laws, and I happened to meet an amazing second love story here. So my fiance's name is Brad, and he has really, truly stepped into this amazing role as father for our children. And while we're not married, our lives are so intertwined that it feels like I have another husband now. And we've created a yoga studio together in this community. Cool. And he has made possible so much of this journey of following the spirit calling to show up and do this work. Because in that space of single motherhood, it felt really hard to create and carve out the opportunities for book writing and for serving clients. And so I deeply appreciate his partnership and his support of this mission and vision that I'm living. So,
I love that. Thanks for sharing. What's the name of the yoga studio?
It's Renkan Yoga Studio. Okay. And I've got to say Renkan is my favorite thing about it because it's the Japanese word for lotus root, and the small community that I lived in Japan when my husband died farmed lotus root. Oh, and that's great. When I was trying to find the name, I noticed that every other yoga studio in the entire world had the lotus blossom in it somehow. Yeah. And I thought, I want this to be a place where people feel safe to bring the deep shadow work that happens in the muddy, mucky waters of life that brings about that beautiful blossom in the end. But I wanted it to be a place where people could come get real and be seen.
Yeah, I love that.
It's funny that that's so awesome. Like, it's funny that we attract these people folks like her unknowingly, because that was when we owned a yoga studio in Michigan, it was same. You know, it's like, this is your place to come and be seen and to really just be who you are, even if it's just for this little hour during the day. Like, that's so awesome, you know? And I just think that's so cool that you're bringing that. And I love that. Thank you.
Love it. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
You know, I think it's just for all the people, not just the widows out there. It's just pay attention and notice what you notice, and let that be more real than the thing you're making it mean. That's how we learn how to love ourselves and love each other. Yeah,
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. And for everyone listening, we'll have links in the show notes for griefunveiled.com. And wow, this was so much fun. So meaningful.
Thank you so much, you guys. This was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chat soon, and namaste.
Namaste.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.